Welcome to Wadsworth History on Film, a program designed to record the oral history of Wadsworth and presented by the Wadsworth Area Historical Society. I'm Caesar Carino, and our guests today are two sisters, Johann Hinkle Sussman and Nancy Hinkle Shega. Shega. Got that right. I should have said that right there. Nancy, since I already messed up your name, how about we'll start with you? And tell us a little bit about where you were born, when you were born, and so forth, and all of those kinds of things. Can you remember when you were born?
No.
You can't remember? Can't remember. How about telling us the day that you were born?
I was born December 22nd, 1936.
1936, December 22nd, right before Christmas.
Right before Christmas.
Where were you living at the time? Or were your parents living at the time?
In Akron?
South Akron.
South Akron.
South Akron. Then you moved here to Wadsworth a little bit later on.
They moved to Wadsworth, then back to Akron. And when I was about 18 months old, 1938, they moved to Reimer Road, and that's where they lived until they passed away. And I lived there until I was married.
Until you're married.
And
you're the baby of the family.
I'm the baby.
And you had two other sisters. One unfortunately is gone, but we'll let Joanne tell about her since she probably knew her better. Joanne, let's find out.
I don't know about that.
Tell us about when you were born and all of that.
I was born in Akron. We lived on Swartz Road.
Swartz Road.
Dad had a farm there, and we moved from there to Wadsworth when I was in first grade.
First grade. and tell us where you lived when you were living there in Wadsworth when you were in the first grade.
In the first grade, I lived on Silver Creek Road, which is now the Ross Farm.
Right. It was down there we have to get the location because the farm may not be there all of the time. But if we're down to the Eastern Road or the South County Line Road, it's the second farm up, which at that time was, well, following you then, the Porters moved in, is that correct?
That's right.
But the Porters moved there. But it's the second farm up, and at the present time is still a farm, as is the farm below it, which was, of course, it started out as being the Sam Lucas farm, and then Louis Thomas became the owner, and they stayed there, and now the Marins live there, the second farm up. So you lived at that point, and you went to which school?
Went to Centralized School.
And who's your first grade teacher?
Miss Kuhn.
Miss Kuhn.
Bertha Kuhn.
Bertha Kuhn. Same person that I had at the same year. We both went to school at the same time. And who was your first grade teacher?
We even rode the same school bus.
We rode the same school bus, right.
Miss Kuhn was my first grade teacher out at Centralized.
Centralized as well. So she stayed there for quite some time. Let's tell a little bit about Martha, your sister, other sister. Tell us a little bit about her.
She was our oldest sister. She was a very pretty girl.
Oh, she was gorgeous.
She married Jack Redinger.
Right. And Jack Redinger lived on Hartman Road, which was Gypsy Lane at that time.
Right. He used to walk all the way from Gypsy Lane clear over to our house on Reimer Road.
He probably walked the back, the back way, probably through the fields, didn't he?
I don't know if he went fields or not, but I know it was a long walk.
Oh, it's a long walk, right? But it was worth it certainly. And Jack had a brother, Paul Redinger, as well.
Right.
In 1937, Jack's mother had a very serious illness, and Dr. Klotz had just walked into Wadsworth, and he went down and he saved her. When Dr. Klotz died, Dr. Klotz's sister said, quote, he had two people whom he thought were his most outstanding patients because he brought Mrs. Redinger back from virtual death, and then the other person was that he operated on my mother for cancer, and she lived for 21 years. Matter of fact, she actually went to his funeral, lived for 21 years. During that time, this was 50 years ago, you know, so we're talking about a long, long time ago when cancer was not. So there's a lot of history there, and wish we could have some of the Redingers, but I don't think there anyone left anymore except for the children. They probably would not know. Tell us a little bit more about Martha.
They had one son, Mark, and he lives up. He's up north of Detroit, and we don't see him as often as we would like to.
Well, you know, when kids get
when you get spread out, it's kind of difficult.
That's right, exactly. Years ago, we all lived together, and of course, it didn't make much difference. And unfortunately, passed away in about 1950.
57.
57. It was a very, very sad thing.
Yeah, she was only 33.
33 years old, yep. That's just a very sad thing. Nancy, your childhood and on Reimer Road probably has a lot of orientation toward open fields. right? Tell us about what you remember about Reimer Road when you were growing up.
We used to ice skate on the road. We played hopscotch on the road.
No cars.
No cars.
It was, when we first moved there in 1938, it was a dirt road.
Oh, yes, right.
Yes,
Absolutely.
it was a dirt road. Oh, it was so much fun when they paved it, and that's when we took to the road.
Well, they didn't really pave it. They just put some tar and chip over it.
Well,
Yes.
yeah.
That was paved to us. That's
that was
right.
for us.
That's right. Before that was dust, a
Right.
lot of dust.
A lot
That's
of
right.
dust.
And who were your neighbors at the time? Do you remember, Nancy?
Oh, yes. East of us was the Kellerman family.
Kellerman family.
Charlotte was my age. She and I went to school together. Ernie was a little older.
By our age.
Was Ernie your age? And then Betty was in between there. And they had an older brother, John, who was probably about Martha's age.
I think he
It
was.
was older than Martha.
Okay. And then the Alcorn girls lived the next house down, Marie, Kathleen, and Jean.
Jean
And-
still lives in town, doesn't she?
Yes.
And Marie lives in
Connecticut.
Connecticut. I knew was out in New England somewhere. She married
Dick.
Dick Wellemeyer. And where does Kathleen live?
She's in North Carolina.
North Carolina. Do you remember who she married?
Dave Maple.
Dave Maple. That's right. From Wadsworth.
No, he was not. He was from Woodsfield, I think,
Well,
Ohio.
they lived here in Wadsworth then. 'cause
Yeah,
The Maples
yes.
lived here in Wadsworth.
Oh, did they?
I mean,
Oh.
The brother
family?
did.
The
I
brother
believe.
did, yeah.
Martha, Maple, and Jean. I think his name was Jean
right,
Maple.
right, that's right. And some of the other neighbors. Now, the reason I'm bringing this up is that Reimer Road is about a mile, well, a little less than a mile long from 94 to the County Line Road, and to show how few houses there are right there.
Okay. And then the next house past the Alcorns were Hales, and Mrs. Hale was a school teacher for
Right.
many years in Wadsworth. She had a son, Doug, who does not live around here anymore. And then across the street, this goes to Hartman Road. These were the houses that were just to Hartman Road, which was at that time Gypsy Lane. And Masons lived across the street.
Which Mason family? There are two Mason families in Wadsworth. I want to make sure we get the right one.
Wilford.
Wilford Mason.
I
That's
think he
not
was
the one that
Wilford.
lived on High Street.
No.
No.
Okay.
And their daughters were
Colleen and Charlotte.
Colleen and
And
Charlotte.
Colleen went to school with us.
She married Elmer Horniak.
Elmer Horniak, and he's dead now.
Yes,
and
right.
is Colleen still living? Isn't she,
He's
right?
Mansfield
Colleen
area.
Mason. And she lived on the corner house, right there on the corner.
On the
of-
north corner.
north corner, northwest corner.
Northeast corner. Well,
No.
it's the one right by Hartman Road.
Right.
Uh-huh.
I think the northwest corner of Hartman and
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
it would be
northwest.
west
yeah,
if you're.
northwest corner,
okay.
right.
And then on up the house where Mosses now live was, well, Crislips moved in there then also. They built a house, they had a peach orchard and sold peaches, and their daughter has built a house east of them, and then they still live there, Mr. and Mrs. Crislip, Denver
right.
Crislip. And then the next house was where Bertalans lived. They had a daughter that was Martha's age.
But they didn't go to Centralize, though, did they?
I don't know when they moved. I used to go up there and play a lot when talked to Mrs. Bertalan, who talked Hungarian, and I didn't understand her, but she and I got along fine.
Got a long time.
I used to have a lot of fun at her house. And their Porters lived,
And that was Jack Porter's.
Yes.
yes.
See, there are two Porters, again, they're not related. The Porters lived on Silver Creek and the Porters lived
Right.
up there. And that was Jack Porter, and he
Right.
was about a little younger than we were, and a little older than you, right?
And there was Fay Porter.
Fay Porter.
And Beverly Porter married a Butterf boy. And they did live in Wadsworth, but I think they have moved out of town too. And that was about it.
Now what's there? Joanne, tell us.
What's there now? Well, we have Walmart.
Walmart. And
Home
what
Depot.
specific kind of thing, and this is what I want to get recorded for our Wadsworth history, what specific kind of thing is there which is extremely, shall we say, sentimental to your family?
Well, I guess you're talking about Hinkle Drive.
Hinkle Drive, absolutely. Hinkle Drive. Hinkle Drive then runs on the east side of Walmart,
Right.
and it was named in honor of your father, Russell Hinkle.
Right.
Russell and Marie Hinkle.
He never had any sons. We were
So
all
now
the
he
girls.
has one that will last for as long as, until someone changes it, of course.
He'd really be proud.
That doesn't really change, usually doesn't change. However, there are streets in Wadsworth that have had their names changed, but it is such a rare occasion that we probably will say that that will outlive all of us. So that's what's wonderful. Joanne, as you remember your earlier days on the farm down in Silver Creek, just you and Martha were well, yeah, no, you
She
were
was
there
baby.
too. That's right, she was a baby, yeah. But what do you remember about that big 100-acre farm that you used to do?
Well, I was always kind of the tomboy, and I was out with my dad all the time, and I rode the hay wagons and looked out for snakes when they pitched the hay up on the wagon. We dumped a load one time. I was in the barn with Dad. I milked a cow a time or two. It was fun.
Then
Good
you went to
memories
school.
there. Pardon?
And then you went to school. And of course, as a student, and I remember this very, very well, you were one of the brightest ones in the class.
Oh, I don't think so.
Oh yes, you're very bright in the class with a beautiful handwriting. And you had the same teachers that I did all 12 years almost until we got to high school, because you became then involved with the commercial subjects. And if you don't tell it, I will. What honor did you receive in the 12th grade for typing?
I don't know. I don't
You and
remember.
Beulah Good were the fastest typists in the school.
Oh, I guess I forgot about that.
95 words per minute on a what kind of typewriter?
Oh,
Standard.
Standard
Yeah,
typewriter,
that's
not
what they were.
electric, on a standard typewriter. And that was something I can still remember, the whole school talking about that. Of course, now, we have or I shouldn't say unfortunately, we have now computers that in a matter of a second go, if you, I don't know how many words a minute they can type, but
they don't go for that anymore too much, do they? I mean, the speed, I don't think.
No, speed, it's,
It's more hunt and peck.
well, they're just most, a lot of kids though are learning the keyboard, but at that time it was a course.
Yes.
And I believe one of the, as a matter of fact, it saved me probably when I went to the service, because I was one of the few people who could type. And I took one semester of typing from, I can't think of her name right now.
Annie Williams?
And,
No, Langeth.
Langeth,
Oh.
yes, Betty Langeth. Took a semester of typing from her, and when I got to the service, I said, "Can anybody type?" And everyone raised his hand. Well, they all had to take a test, and I was the only one who passed it. And I could type fairly well. And boy, did I ever learn how to type fast in the
Faster.
service. Let me tell you, better to type than to carry a gun. What do you remember particularly about your elementary school days? And I'm going to ask Nancy this first, because we're going to ask her also to name some of the friends, male and female, if you had any male friends in the first and second or third or fourth grades. But who were some of your friends, and what do you remember about the nice times of your elementary school days?
Well, I think it was all pretty fun. It was small. We were a fairly large class. It seemed like we had that was more like into junior high when we were there. We had like a 7A and a 7B class because there were so many of us. But in grade school, I had Miss Kuhn, of course, as my first grade teacher. My second grade teacher was Mrs. Vining, who lived right over on Stratford Avenue.
Yellow House.
Yes.
Harriet May Vining.
She was a nice lady.
Yeah.
Lovely.
And my third grade teacher was Mrs. Emmerich, and my fourth grade was Mrs. Miller. And
Audrey Miller.
we had some of the kids in my class we went all through high school, and we were the country kids, of course, at that time, and went there even for our 9th grade. We were sophomores when we
Who were
went to
some of the
high
kids
school.
you can remember?
Janet Freed,
Janet Freed.
Herger. She's married to Glenn Herger. Sue Keener, who is married to Hirschberger is her last name now. Glenn. Glenn was a year ahead of us in school, in high school. Mildred Brubaker was another one. Jim Gardner lived over on Stratford. Shirley Brown Buckingham, who was a nurse at Wadsworth Hospital for many years. Clara Ann Kreider. Tom Ducar lived out on the hill, on Acme Hill.
He had brothers also.
Yes, and Jack Graves lived out there, and Roberta Morrison, she's
now.
Kelly now. Boy.
That's great. That's wonderful. To be able to get through them.
And like I say, most of us went all through school together.
Do you still get together?
There are 5 of us that get together now, but those are mostly girls that I met when I was in high school, and that is Barbara Fisher Thompson, Gus Thompson's wife, and Roberta Storm Haylock, who lives in Hudson. She lived on Overlook. and Betty Coppage Beitzel, who lived on Pardee Street, and Patsy Brickbeck Swigert, who we still get together about once a month.
You married
She married John Swigert.
Bob Swigert's son. Joanne did the same thing.
I don't think I could do that. They were there. We were really a close-knit bunch of kids. I mean, you
that's
knew
all we had.
everybody. Right, right. Well, there was you, of course.
Yes.
There was Julius Bizanelli, Joan Flaff.
Well, she didn't come until 9th grade.
No, she didn't come till 9th grade. But in the early years, there was Bud Hartman, Helen Pecknick, Marie Alcorn.
Marilyn Thomas.
Yeah.
Wilbur Pfeiffer.
Oh, yes, yes. Wilbur came to one of our class reunions.
Yes, he did.
and
Wilbur's a
was-
scientist.
Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We could do this all day long. Who's your friends and so forth and so on. What about your individual families at the present time? Joanne, you got married, 53 years ago?
Right,
Something like
right.
that? And tell us a little bit about whom you married and your children and what they're doing and where they're living and so forth and so on. That'd be very important.
I married Howard Sussman.
How'd you meet him?
We met him at the Medina Skateland.
That's
We were
Medina Skateland.
both roller skaters way back in 49, 50. After we married, he went into the Army for 2 years.
Well, we all did.
I stayed at home with my mom and dad. After he came out, we moved to Akron, and he went to Akron U for a while. And then we had David. And
David, when did you have David?
He was born in 53.
53.
Mm-hmm. And Jeff was born in 56, and John in
80.
81. No, 80. 80.
Yeah.
I have to stop and think.
A big jump between those two.
Mm-hmm. That was supposed to be the girl, but it never happened.
Never happened. the Hinkles had all the girls.
Yeah, that's right. Right. Yeah. So all the boys live in town. I feel very fortunate.
And one of them is...
David married Janet May, and they have one daughter, Stephanie, who's a sophomore in high school. Jeff married Loretta Rush, who is from Rittman. They have a son, Joshua, who is at Ohio U, and Jessica is a senior at Wadsworth High. John has 3. Back up. He married Vicki Sussman, or Vicki Plyler from Ashtabula. And
who has the Sussman and Associates
accounting
firm here in town.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Their oldest daughter is Leah. Then there's Megan. Leah's 16.
Mm-hmm.
She will be 16. Megan's birthday was yesterday. She was 14, and Jacob is 12.
Was 12.
Mm-hmm.
And then all these years, you did what?
Well, I was kind of one of the fixtures at the old Jim Rich, it was Dodge Plymouth when I first started working there. And we went from Jim Rich to Mickey Miller to Mike Benelli to Courtesy Pontiac, and I was there a total of 27 years.
27 years.
As
As a matter of
manager.
fact, not only were you the fixture there, but the one that everyone depended upon. I can remember my brother talking about, my brother had Carino Ignition, and of course he dealt with all
I
the
saw
other
him a
garages,
lot.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And he said he never called into the owners. He always called Joanne because we got the answers from Joanne. Tell us a little bit about Jim Rich. I mean, of course, I'd love to have his family also, but I can't get anyone to come on the program for him. I tried 2 or 3 of the Riches, and no one wants to come on. Tell us a little bit about Jim Rich.
He was a very, very nice man to work for.
Very nice.
Very, very nice man. I had come there from the Ohio Injector. And,
What'd you do at the Injector, and who was your boss at the Injector? Tell us a little bit about some of the people who worked there. Pardon me?
Mick George.
Mick George, right.
Bob McGeorge.
Bob McGeorge,
yes,
right.
Yes. I worked in the payroll department.
Payroll
there.
department, but you worked in the new office building.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And that was something at that time.
Oh, yeah, it was really neat.
Palatial at the time. Right now, it's unfortunate.
It's kind of a sad sight to see it.
But who else worked with you in that payroll department?
Joanne Allen.
Joanne Allen, that's
Joanne
right, who was one of our classmates. She is now Joanne McKittrick. Well, she was McKittrick.
She was McKittrick,
and
and now what's Joanne's name?
then her husband died.
Yes.
She married
yes,
again. I can't think of
yeah.
the name right now.
I can't either.
Bob Allen was her brother.
Mm-hmm.
So what we're doing here is trying to record for posterity all of these relationships. That's why we keep on saying these things. I know that you know these things, but we have to put them on the air. Tell us a little bit more about some of the other people who worked there in the...
Let's see, there was Bess Cahoon, Joanne Cahoon's mother.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Mary Ann Rush worked there. And Mary Ann, she was Mary Ann Runkle, married Willard Rush from Rittman, and they, Loretta, Jeff's wife, they are her parents.
They're
so
parents, that's
we
right.
share the
That's what
same,
I wanted to hear you say, that there
we
was a
share the same
relationship there.
and that was an old-time friendship, and we've been friends for years and years. And
That you knew your in-laws before they knew that your children knew
that's
each
right,
other.
right.
That's right.
Oh, the kids, we camped together. They played together, and it just was one of those things. It
That's
just
right.
it happened, and it's
And
been very
that's-
nice.
That's great. And who was the chief person down there at the injector when you were working there?
Upstairs, McCurdy, Mr. McCurdy. I think he was more or less in charge of our floor.
I mean, who was the CEO of the injector?
Oh, Young.
Yes, which
Yeah,
one though?
Wayne.
Wayne Young,
Yeah.
right. Did you get to see him much?
Not very often.
very often.
No. Yeah, our offices were upstairs, and they were.
Now, did you process his payroll?
No.
No, you did not.
Never saw that one. No, we just did the factory. We
the
never saw
factory.
that one.
Then you went from there to Jim Rich. Tell us a little bit more about Jim Rich. I mean, just a wonderful person.
Yes, he
The
was.
whole family, all of the Riches. Just great, great, great
Lucille
people.
is
Lucille.
every bit as nice. I
Yes, she
see
is.
Lucille just every once in a while. And she more or less taught me the automotive bookkeeping.
And there's quite a bit in automotive bookkeeping, isn't there? That's right.
Yeah, that was all done, of course, by hand then. You
When
wrote
you-
everything.
When you went to one of our, how did it feel to then work for Mickey Miller, who was much younger than we were, because he was behind us in school, what, about 10 years or so, wasn't he?
Yeah,
And a completely different type of person.
yes.
Of course, he was a Wadsworth boy. His father was the sign painter who was
Mort Miller.
Miller. And his sister, a very, very dear friend of all of ours, Marilyn Miller Gordon, who has been a mainstay at the hospital
For a long time.
everyone in Wadsworth who has ever gone to the emergency room knows Marilyn Miller, or
Marilyn.
Marilyn Gordon. That's right. Tell us a little bit about Mickey. I mean, his personality.
He was a lot of fun.
Oh, mercy
He was a lot of fun to work for. It was all the guys were. I never had any trouble with my bosses. They were.
Well, of course not.
They had a. It was. I don't know how you want to say it. It was different from when Jim was manager. But he let. I don't know. It seemed like we had younger salesmen or something.
Well, he was just a kid.
Yeah, yeah.
But boy, sharp, just super sharp.
And his
then-
children were very
Yes,
very young then
yes,
too.
Right, that's right, exactly. And how about Benelli?
Well, he was different too.
How was Benelli different?
He
He was from Akron, wasn't he?
No, he was from Cleveland area, Chesterland. He actually lived in Chesterland.
Check. I thought it was from Akron, but okay.
No, he drove back and forth from Chesterland the whole time he
You
had
drive a
business.
Pontiac?
Oh yeah, or Olds, whatever. And but he was nice. I had never, like I say, I never had any problems with any of them. They were
Then
good
it went
to me.
to a corporation, did it not?
Yes, yeah. Pete Bauer bought the business, and it was called Courtesy Pontiac then.
Then when did you retire?
When who's the one in Barberton that bought us out?
Bishop.
Bishop,
When
Bishop
Bishop bought
Buick.
us out, he didn't keep anybody.
Didn't keep anybody?
No, we
Well,
just got tossed.
a real loss, a real loss.
But I went on to work after that, actually, before I had finished closing up for Bishop, or for Courtesy. Fred Maybaugh called and
From Rittman.
told me he needed some help, and
You
I
down
went over
to what?
there and kind of straightened them out a little bit.
You
and-
straightened them all out, and you stayed with General Motors all of that time.
All that time.
Making sure that you had either a Pontiac or a Buick in your
That's right,
garage. That's
right.
wonderful. Nancy, how about you?
Well,
We haven't started, not your work section, how about your marriage?
I married Ed McGill Jr., who lived on Lyman Street.
And you were together in school, were you not?
We went to school together. He was a year ahead of me. We were married. And I had Michael was born in 1957, and he's married to Lori Bailey, who they lived out on Stewart Drive.
Stewart Drive.
Her brother is Steve Bailey, the attorney.
Right.
Then they have a daughter, Erica, who is a 4th grade teacher at Stowe, and a son, Clark, who is just on his way home from Italy, for a while anyway. And
In the service.
yes, in the service.
He's not vacationing over
No,
there.
no, darn it. Erica is married and has to Brian, and has a little boy, Caleb, who is 4 and expecting another one. I have two great grandsons. And
She's younger than you, Joanne.
I know.
Do you have any great-grandsons?
No. No.
Clark is married to a girl named Alicia. They have a little boy, Ethan, who will be 2 this month. Scott is married to a girl named Karen. She is not from here. She's from Kent. And they have a little boy, Matt, who just turned 10, and Amy, who is 5. And they live in Medina. Mike lives out on Stewart Drive. Don lives in Smithville, and he has a son, Drew.
That's your son, Don.
My son, Don, who has a son, Drew, who is a senior at Doylestown High School this year. And Garrett is 15. He's a freshman this year. And then Kurt, my youngest son, Don, let's see, Mike was born in 57, Scott was born in 59, and Don was born in 1960. And then in 1964 we had Kurt, and he lives in Virginia Beach and is married to a girl from there. And they have a little boy, Jacob, who is 8, and Brent, who is 6.
Well, you boned up on these things, didn't you?
And I have all boys. If you notice, the boys sort of follow in this marriage. In our family, I have the granddaughter. Both granddaughters are the oldest and the youngest. And then Ed passed away in 1985.
That's so sad.
Yeah, he was. And in 1990, I married Ed Shega.
And Ed's wife had passed on.
And his wife had passed away. She worked out at Wadsworth Transmission for out there.
She was very young, too, when she died.
Yes, she was 45 when she passed away.
Horrible. And Ed is a completely different person from your first Ed.
Yes, yeah. Ed, my first husband, was an electrician in Wadsworth, and
He had a brother, Gene McGill.
he had a brother, Gene, and a brother, Dick.
Dick.
And then Sandy and Judy and Sheila are his sisters.
There were six McGills in that family.
Right.
Tell us where the McGills lived. I think would
They
be.
lived on North Lyman Street.
Are there any of them who would be able to give us a history of the McGill family? Because the McGills go back a good 75 years here in town.
Oh, I'm sure there are a couple of them.
Well,
if
if you
they
can-
would come. I'll have
If they
to
would
talk to
come,
them.
if they
Yeah,
would come.
yeah. 2 of the girls live here in town. Judy and Sheila both live in town. Judy's married to Don Hawk, and Sheila's married to Wayne Perrin, and they both live here in Wadsworth. And then I have 3 stepsons. Tom was born in 57. He and my Mike are the same age. Ed's son Tim and my Scott are the same age. And he also has an older daughter, Carol, who is a couple years older, and Carol's a nurse practitioner out in Denver, Colorado.
Denver, Colorado. How did you meet Ed Shega?
Through mutual friends.
Through mutual friends. Now tell us the difference between the two in terms of their avocations.
Okay, well, Ed McGill was an electrician, and my husband now, Ed, was worked at Firestone, and he also was a farmer. He grew up in Sherman, which they don't call it Sherman anymore, do they?
Oh, they surely do.
They?
Yes,
Sherman.
and I knew his family very well. I was a principal at Sherman 50 years ago, so I knew that whole family. All of them. There are a million of them, too, and they're all related.
Yes, we go by the name Shega. The Segas are all related
All
to
related.
him, and that came through coming from Slovenia, the alphabet. They put a little, over the H, a little mark, and some of them dropped the H sound, and some of them, Ed kept the Shega sound, and the other ones
They
the
put
Segas.
the accent is over the E, which makes it sh.
Yeah, which gives it
Shega.
the H.
Mhm.
Yeah. And so that is, he farmed, and then he went to work at Firestone, and then he went back into farming right before he retired for a few years, because the farm was still, his dad had the farm, and he farmed a while and then finally sold the farm, is in retirement now and enjoying playing the button box
That's
accordion.
right. That's one thing that was completely different. And culturally, the Hinkle girls probably never were polka fans.
Oh, no, I still
know how to polka.
No, I came into a different ethnic type of marriage this
But it
time.
works out so well because, you know, he is so laid back and
Yes.
just the nicest guy in the world. Of course, I've known Ed for years and years. How old is Ed? About 70?
3. He just had a
73.
birthday.
We're the same age. I remember that, but I remember him from way, 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 way back. And of course, all of the Segas and the Shegas. So at least 50 years for the Shega family and at least 60 years for the Sega family here in town. He's 73 now, and you're 67, 67.
Almost 68.
Almost 68. And Joanne, you're 74.
That Christmas baby.
That's right, that
Right.
Christmas baby, that's right, exactly. And what about your work schedule? What did you do?
Well, when I graduated from high school, I went to Morton Salt, which is the Moose
Right.
Club on South Main Street. And I was a secretary to the assistant manager
And
there.
who was that at the time?
Ken Stevens.
Okay,
He was
tell
a
us.
man from Kentucky, and he was about the most laid-back boss you could ever work for. He was a very nice man. He was divorced and lived with Mrs. Sterling Seacrest's
Seacrest's
mother
mother.
on Beck Street.
Phoebe.
Yes,
Phoebe
who
Seacrest.
was related to the McGills, but that had nothing to do
No,
with
that's
where
right.
he lived. But he lived there, and a very nice man. And then the manager down there was Fred Schreiber. Schreiber was his
Schreiber
last name. I
from-
can't
from-
think of his first name. And Goldie Orris was his secretary. And
Fred
when
lived
she
on Woodland Avenue.
Yes.
283, I think, Woodland, I'm not
Ann
sure, but.
had
that-
Ann, and she had a brother, and I don't remember his name.
Right.
But when Goldie Orris would go on vacation, I would have to take his dictation, and he scared me to death.
Oh, really?
Because he was so different than Mr. Stevens. But anyway, they were both nice people, and I worked there until I was married, and then I stayed home with my children. And then when Ed became an electrician, I did his book work for him and ran a lot of errands. And then after he passed away, I went to work.
And where did you work then?
First, I worked at PCM down on Berge Street.
And PCM was what? It's what- that
It was
may-
PMC.
That may not be
PMC,
here
I
one of these
think.
days. Tell us what
They
made.
did tire castings.
castings, that's right.
Down there.
They're-
And
Aren't they on Seville Road now? Are they still on Berge Street?
I think they're probably still on
Are
Berge
they?
Street. The ones on Seville Road are their competitor, Admiral.
Okay, Admiral's the competitor.
Admiral's
All
theirs.
right.
And I lost that job. And then I went to work. My sister got me in at the car dealership.
Oh, really? Doing what?
I was service secretary for 5 years
Where?
until on Broad Street. I worked for Mike Benelli until Bishop came in and told us goodbye one day. And after that, I was remarried in 1990. I didn't work for a while, and then I went to work for 5 years at Durbin Floors in Doylestown.
Doylestown.
Worked part-time down there for them. They were a very nice bunch of people.
Well, that takes care of the work part. Now, let's get into the really serious stuff here.
Uh-oh.
When you left high school, Joanne, tell us what the world was like.
What the world was like.
1948.
Oh,
We had just come out of a war,
yes.
and there was a little more hope than we had because you and I both went through the Depression. We went through a war, and
We were
before
depression babies.
Depression baby. As a result, we didn't know what normalcy was
No,
until
that's true.
we got out of high
yeah,
school.
we went, in after the war,
After the
and
war.
it was a good time. I mean, it was just seems like it was very good times.
It was,
That
and
day.
it's one of those things that you were under such repression for so many years that all of a sudden there was a little bit of fresh air to breathe. So you had a little bit more hope. What was happening to the world, though, in terms of society and the mores of society? You and I were both born during an era where the strictness of morality was something that,
Oh, I
It's
should
just-
say.
you know, you weren't allowed to say or
Not
do
like
anything.
today.
Not today. But what was happening in the world as far as you were concerned in 1948?
Gosh.
We were concerned about the Russians, weren't we?
Yeah.
We were concerned about the Russians because at that time there began to become just a little bit of anxiety on our side, in our minds, because we didn't know they had you know, we had already had the atomic bomb that had been dropped in Japan, and the Russians were getting kind of ouchy, and we were having some problems there. And then a little bit later, it didn't take long for the Second World War, and then the Korean War. And of course that broke out, and it was a forgotten war. As a matter of fact, I was in the Korean War.
That Howard was too.
And I got, and Howard did too probably, I got my recognition pin exactly 50 years after it began, that they recognized it as a war rather than a conflict. 50 years, 50 years. So we didn't have a whole lot of peace, but we had a little bit of peace there. Then you said that you got married, and then he went
overseas.
And we've had war ever since. Now you had just a wee little bit of a different background, because you came up 5 years later than we did. And when you graduated from high school in 53, 54, what was happening?
You know, I think at that time when we were so young, we had such a good time. I mean, it was life. We were young. We didn't really pay much attention to what was going on in the world at that time. I mean, it was just good times, and work was good, jobs were good, construction was good, and it was just, I don't know. Then let's see, the Korean War was when?
51 to 53 or 4.
54. See, I think that was what the war was pretty much over, but then the draft, the guys didn't go to the
We didn't get in the draft.
That era sort of missed. Now, some of the guys did, the boys went into the service, but it was more.
They volunteered.
They volunteered, where we were more interested in working, and like I say, it seemed like the jobs at that particular time were good for the guys, and it was a good time. I think we probably lived in some of the best years.
I want to hear you say that. You lived in some of the very, very best years. Your high school that did not have the same kind of aura that ours was, for instance.
No.
I started interviewing about 70 years ago, and I started with people who were at that time 90 years old, 80 years old, and 70. Almost, Nancy, you're the first one who's able to report that your high school days were
good.
Almost. Not even your sister Joanne can say that, because we were.
A lot of us had part-time jobs. Some of us would work. I worked in school. I worked for Bob McGeorge, who had worked at the Injector, I guess, and he was a public accountant up above Accurate, where Accurate is now.
150 Main Street, upstairs.
First of all, before that, I sold tickets at Strand Theater.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Who was the projectionist of the Strand Theater at the time?
Well, George Witchie.
George Witchie was one of them.
Was one of them, but I don't know who. John Wohler was the manager.
He was the manager, but
very nice man.
And what about Yaki, Mr. Yaki?
I didn't know him.
Well,
We evidently didn't know the man upstairs.
I have the original book,
projectionist.
1924, 25, I think I have the original book from which he learned how to operate
to run the projector.
And it's really interesting. I mean, archaic compared to what they do now. But you know, it showed how you had to pull this lever, and how you had to watch, and had to put it in this hole, and so forth. Oh, it's really something. I had his wife on many years ago. Of course, she's dead now. He was the first one, then George Witchie, and of course Wohler was over there. And you sold tickets at the Strand Theater. How much were the tickets at the Strand Theater at that time, and what kinds of shows did they have?
Oh gosh, I don't remember how much the tickets were. 50 cents maybe? I don't really remember.
How much were they when we were growing up?
10 cents.
10 cents.
Until you were about how old?
Oh, I don't know.
Oh, high school.
But they used to ask you how long you were.
Well, yeah, I used to get in at I was real small, and I was past the 12-year, and I was still getting in at the lesser rate.
We also sold candy, the popcorn. I worked in the concession stand on Saturdays, and Mr. Wohler always had his own little penny candy that he could sell. He sold that and made his own little money. And he was always a very nice man, but he came across very gruff to people
Oh,
who
yeah,
did not
sure.
know him. I mean, and he would always keep count, boy, he knew how much of his candy had been sold. And another side to the theater, a little different than the way it is today. Anyone could come anytime during the movie. You didn't wait until sometimes you came in during the middle of the movie.
Oh, yeah.
Walked right in.
Oh, yeah.
And walked right in, so
Walked
you
in
saw
front of
the
people.
end.
Then you'd wait and see the beginning.
right.
And then you'd wait and see the beginning, and there was usually a double feature. And we always had the boys that were the ushers, and sometimes Mr. Wooler or Mr. Witchy would get in there with his little flashlight and walk up and down the aisle. And anybody that talked, you could easily get thrown out of the theater
Oh,
in
and
those
George could do it, too.
days. Yeah, and
George
but-
had an aura about him of authority too.
Oh yes, I mean you respected him
Oh, you bet.
because but they were nice people to work for, and that was a fun job. It was I was 15 when I started to work there, and then from there I went to work for Mr. McGeorge, who was like I say public accountant, and then I worked for a short while at the dairy. The little custard stand that is the parking lot of the library now on the corner of Lyman Street. There was a little custard stand there, and I didn't work there too long, but and then when I graduated. But
Now you're living way out there on Reimer Road, which is 3 miles from town or 2.5
that was a
miles
long
from town.
ways.
2 miles.
And how did you get there?
I mean, where we moved from?
No, how did you get to work?
Oh.
Oh, I walked up to the end of the road, which was the corner of State Road and I rode to work with a woman that worked at the Salt with me. And my dad would pick me up at night,
At age what?
17.
17. Ask a 17-year-old now to go out to the edge of the road and get a ride. Unless they have their own car with their own garage with their own
Yeah.
chauffeur.
I didn't get my driver's license till Mike was in the 7th grade. And
Oh, really?
I survived. We lived out on Hillcrest, which was off of Silver Creek.
We
And,
hauled her around.
Yeah.
We were her taxi.
And my mom would come and get me, but I never felt that I was missing anything until I did start to drive.
Right. Now, Joanne, we're going to go way, way, way back, as long as you can possibly remember.
Uh-oh.
Marie Hinkle. Tell us about Marie Hinkle. Marie, maiden name, Marie, what was she like? Tell us all about
She
her.
was Marie Whitmer,
From
Akron.
Akron.
She and my dad were married in 1924. He came to Ohio when he was only 14
From
Buchanan, West Virginia. He came up here. They moved all their furniture by train, and he had a horse, and he rode in the boxcar with the horse. But they were married in 24, and Martha was born, I guess, in 25.
25.
And,
Buchanan, West Virginia. When I was principal of Sherman School, I had a teacher from Buchanan, West Virginia, and their family, the Smith family, owned the entire town because it was all coal mining. And I wonder if I wish I would have.
it's a pretty little town.
I was down there, and of course, there's nothing there now. I mean, it's just almost dead.
My grandparents had a huge house there. It was near the college campus, and they rented out rooms to college
To college
students.
students, right. Tell us a bit more about Marie Hinkle.
She was a tiny little lady, very busy.
Feisty.
Yes, she had very dark brown eyes, and when she got irritated with us, they
They got darker.
they were nasty. You knew she meant business.
She lived to be, what, 90?
98.
98. God bless her. That was wonderful. And
And she up until the end, she had, her mind was very sharp yet.
as I talked to her, as a matter of fact, when she was in the last few days that she was in the
At Alder Care?
Alder Care. I think I was going to say the hospital down, the old hospital, of course, is Alder Care. And she hadn't seen me since one time that you and she were at the church. I had sung at the church,
Yes.
and then she had seen me there. She recognized me that fast. I hadn't seen her since then.
Yeah,
That
she
had to be a
would.
good 5 or 6 years. Well, she picked me right out, and she told me embarrassing things about myself right off the bat, in front of everybody. She's a great person.
She sewed, she knitted, she crocheted, she
Quilted.
Never worked outside the house, did she?
No, during the war, she worked at the Cyberling Rubber
Did she?
Company. I don't remember how long. That was just a maybe a year, year and a half, something like that.
Now, your mother was 98 years old when she died, so therefore she was, and she's been dead, what, 5 years now?
Two.
2 years, so she'll be 100 years old now. So she was born in 1904, right? She learned how to drive a car when?
Oh, way back when we lived on the farm in South Akron. Way, way back. They never had to have driver's license
That's right,
back
until
then.
1937 they didn't have to have a driver's license.
She was learning, and back then Dad did a lot of, at that time he even had did some truck farming. And in the spring he had the hotbed, and she was practicing, and she backed right into his hotbed.
Into the hotbed, and took care of the driving lessons for a while. Tell us a little bit about that red truck that you used to have.
Yeah, the red truck was on the farm down on Silver Creek Road.
And what year was it?
30.
3.
Was it a 33?
33, yes.
I'll have to look at the sale thing to tell you that.
32 or 33. I think it was 33.
Yeah, it was a sharp little
Oh,
little truck.
yes, I remember coming by the house. Now, we haven't got to your dad, and we're going to let you talk about your dad.
Okay. Okay, Dad was born in 1902. He came from Buchanan, West Virginia. The earliest days was when I remember his dad was out on Reimer Road. He loved to raise garden produce, and he would raise truck garden. He worked at B.F. Goodrich, so he planted the garden. And this was pretty much by the time Joe was in high school, so she didn't have to do a lot of the garden
We're going
work.
to call on sisters now.
I picked strawberries.
She picked strawberries.
Yes, we all picked strawberries.
Dad raised strawberries, had a lot of strawberries, had a little orchard in the back. He would make cider, and every year he would take the apples over to Norton and have them pressed and made cider and would sell it out front at Loyal Oak, yes. And then he had his strawberries, and he had truck garden for a couple years, and my mom and I would every 3 days a week go to Barberton to the market over.
Glad you mentioned that. Tell us where that was, and tell us a little bit about the Barberton Market.
Okay, the Barberton Market was on 4th Street.
Way down.
It's
way down on 4th Street.
Yeah, it's where there's a school there now, and it's sort of by B&C was back in there, I
Right.
think, at that time. And it was a little gravel, actually it was a black coal almost driveway, and there were little cinders, yes, and there were little
You got the
wooden
cinders free from B&W.
Okay, yeah, and just little wooden tables, and you sat your produce out early in the morning, and
How early? Tell us how early it had to be.
Gosh, it was probably about 6 o'clock in the
Yep.
morning. It seemed to me it was nighttime yet when we would get up to go in the fog, drive over in the fog a lot. And the women would come just at daybreak, and there would be everything there for them to buy, from gladiolus to vegetables. And then after we were done, we'd pack up what was left and go home. Well, then when Dad came home in the afternoon, I would go with him. He took the back seat out of the car, and he'd put all of his baskets of tomatoes and peppers and things in. And at that time, every little neighborhood had a corner store, and we would head to Akron and Barberton, mostly in the Akron area, off of over where Summit Beach was, Summit
Right.
Beach Park and that. And I can always remember I was so glad when he sold that last basket and we could go home.
Go home.
And then as he got older, when he was working, he planted trees, pine trees. And for many,
lot of pine trees.
lot
Oh,
of
lot
pine
of
trees.
pine
He had
trees.
the 5 acres, and probably 4.5 of it was in pine trees, or 4 acres. And he would sell pine trees, and he could people could go out and mark their trees and then come back later at Christmas and cut them. He did that for many years, and then one time he told us that he was going to go buy some more seedlings, and we laughed because we thought, oh gosh, at Dad's age. Well, Dad lived long enough to see those sold as Christmas trees, and he died in 1994 at the age of 92.
92.
His mind was sharp as a tack, yet his body just actually wore out. And up until 3 months before he died, he was still out planting his garden.
The two of you have good genes then for a long life as well, so you'll probably be one of the oldest ones in our class to live.
We'll see.
Tell us, what was the last year that your mother was at the Reimer Road?
At Reimer Road in 97.
97.
Yes, Dad
She
died in
still
94, and she stayed there for
sold
3
sweet
years.
corn at night when she was out there.
No, I don't think
I bought it.
Maybe your kids had corn? They had corn.
Yeah, the kids had
She sold it
garden.
to him.
Yeah,
He
it
came
could
out-
be.
he came right out
You're
and said,
probably
Yeah.
right.
I
Yeah.
bought 2 dozen of sweet corn, or a dozen of sweet corn for $2, and of course that was a very good price at the time. Now let's go back to your early childhood days again, because we forgot some of the things that are extremely important. You met Gene McGill in high school,
Ed.
and when did you first meet him and how? And was it love at first sight, or was it one of those things where you had to?
Well, I met him at school, just how, I don't know, in talking, and must have been sort of drawn to each other. And he would walk me to class, and we dated. I was a sophomore, and we dated through high school. And no, I think we just sort of grew together as
Grew together.
yeah, it wasn't like I'm going to marry this guy someday. And then I worked for 3 years. I graduated in '54 and was married in '57 then, and he had been out of school since '53, and we got married, and we lived on East North Street. We had an upstairs apartment there in a house, and Bob Borth owned, and we lived there until 1960, and then we built a house out on Hillcrest Drive off of Silver Creek Road. And we were there until 1964, and we built a house out where I live now. And after he passed away, I built a ranch next door to that. So it was a story and a half, and I built a ranch, so I had everything on one floor.
One floor, so in case you ever got old.
Right, so when I get old, yeah.
Let's take a different tack with Joanne in terms of your early childhood days. Tell us what the social life was like in the early 40s and the late 40s, for girls especially in Wadsworth.
Oh, well, everybody, you always wore dresses to school. There was no...
Okay, that's not one thing. You always wore dresses. We were not permitted to wear
no slacks.
no
No
slacks
nothing.
or anything like that.
The only time we were allowed to wear slacks was, I think, at the last day, next to the last day of school, we had a picnic, and we were allowed to wear the pants then. But otherwise, you wore
slacks.
dresses.
Our
to
dresses,
school.
rather. That's right, exactly. What about the social life? What did you do for social life?
What did we do? Well, we listened to radio in the 40s. You just...
Much dating?
Pardon?
Much dating?
I didn't do a lot of dating. I went steady in high school my last couple years, but I went with Mike Strons.
Right.
When I up till I graduated, and then he went into the Marines, and of course that was a way, and we and during that time, then I met Howard, and
That was it.
That was it.
Now, Mike Strons, and I hope that I don't bring up any memories that I'm not supposed to bring up here, but he had a large family, and I think that the last sister was
Jean?
Mary.
Lived on Grandview.
Mary Jane.
Mary Jane.
Mary Jane Strong, yeah, Mary Jane Hallowell, yeah. She's gone now, and there are no Stronses left in Wadsworth.
No, none in Wadsworth anymore.
However, Nora Strons, his mother, was a teacher here in Wadsworth, and they went back about 80 to 85 years here in Wadsworth. And I really would like to be able to get Mike back here, but I have no idea where he is. Do you
He's
know?
in Jamestown, New York.
He's in Jamestown, New York. I'd love to be able to get him, because he probably is the only one living of the family. And he had a large family too, as I remember.
Yes, I think they had 7 children.
What I'm trying to get at here is the type of boy-girl relationship in high school. Now, you say you went steady. However, that doesn't mean that you had carte blanche from your parents and from everyone else to just do anything that you wanted to.
Oh, heavens, no.
Tell us about
Oh,
that.
no.
That's what I'm
Well,
talking
we
about.
had a very strict father, and it was,
And there was probably
A
everyone's
midnight
father was.
curfew.
yes. I
was
think it
your
was
curfew?
11 when I went.
What was yours?
Well, I had 12, but Mom would move the clock back an hour for me, so I had till 1.
She was lucky. I think mine was
I was
11.
the baby.
But what I'm trying to do here is just 5 years difference of how things have changed. You went steady, but your father was very strict, but most of the fathers were very strict at that
Oh,
time.
yes. Oh, yes.
I can remember, kids going steady and never dating one another. because they weren't permitted
Well,
to.
what we did, most of the time you didn't leave town. You went to the show. I mean,
If
it
you-
seems like
yeah.
every weekend you went to see a movie and
That was about
went
it.
over to DeVern's and had a milkshake.
If you
and
were able to go that far. And DeVern's was where? Norton at the
Norton.
time, right now.
Cooks.
We have just a couple minutes left, and I'd like to get to another aspect of your history. Let's go to the work part one more time, because there's something that I wanted to ask you, and we got away from it. In the Jim Rich era of the Pontiac Olds, or Pontiac, he had
Dodge Plymouth first.
I'm sorry, Dodge Plymouth, right? That's what I was trying to say, Dodge Plymouth. How did he change from the Chrysler products to the General Motors?
GM, as I recall, more or less came and asked.
Okay.
It might have been that he went to them. That I wouldn't say for sure, but it was between.
And what did that do as far as you were concerned?
Nothing, not a whole lot of
Not at
difference.
all.
No.
As far as you were concerned, the money's coming in one way or
right.
the other.
It didn't.
But what did it do about, didn't GM have different rules and regulations from what Chrysler
Than
had?
Chrysler had? Not that I recall.
You never-
as far
never
as the
got involved
bookwork
with
went,
that.
it was pretty much the same.
Right. Now, in the original, well, that's going to be wrong, because it would not be original. When you first started working there, which was what year?
In 1950, the fall of 1950.
Fall of 1950, you started working there, which is 2 years after you graduated.
Mm-hmm.
Who were some of the mechanics and who were some of the people who worked there?
Oh gosh, one of them was one of our better mechanics. I recall. They always requested him was Harold Hummel.
Harold Hummel?
Uh-huh.
From Doylestown, wasn't
he worked in parts department also. No, Harold was. Yeah, he was from Doylestown.
Yeah, from
wasn't
Doylestown.
he? Chupa, Biagio
Chupa, yeah, BG.
He was the service manager.
Right.
He was a lot of fun.
From Water Street.
Yeah, yeah.
Big family of Water Street.
Mm-hmm.
And who else?
Caesar, I can't recall any of the others. That's too long ago.
Oh, come on, Joanne. And who were the other people on the floor where you were?
On the floor, the gym, there was Don Mansfield.
Don
He
Mansfield.
was general manager. Think of some of the salesmen. Neil Howell was a salesman for a while. Ed Davison was. He stayed along in the dealership for a long time. He was even there when Nancy came under Benelli. He was a good salesman.
Now comes the big question. How much did a car cost in 1950?
In 1950, right around, my first car was a Plymouth, and it was in 1950, and I think I paid $1,400 for it.
$1,400. You can't buy the tires for that now. $1,400. And it probably was one of the better Plymouths too, was it not?
It was nice,
A
yes.
nice Plymouth.
Yes. And Jim Rich financed it for me.
Right. And following that, when did they start going up, and when did you start seeing them up to 4,000 and 3,000? You thought it would never be able to get that high.
They went, let me think, the 6,000. We were living in Cauga Falls when we had moved to Cauga Falls after Howard got out of the Army. And I think they were running around, that was in 53, 54, no, 52, 53, when they were probably in the 6,700, 6,800.
Good. Now we have a quick moment here. We have only about 13 seconds left. Have you forgotten to name any of your grandchildren? Because if you did, you're in trouble.
I don't think so.
Okay, did you forget to name any of
I
your
don't think
grandchildren?
so.
You're in trouble. Joanne and Nancy, thank you very much. We unfortunately have come to the end of the hour, and we are so appreciative of hearing something from one of the families, and now we have the Hinkle name and posterity because of Hinkle Drive. Thank you again.
Thank you.
It's
Thank
been
you.
wonderful having you.
Thank you.